Sheriff Charles Lawson had always been a man of great pride. He had worked hard his entire life to build his reputation in the small town of Spring Hill. Known for his sharp mind and strong leadership, Charles commanded respect from everyone. As the sheriff, he held authority, not just in his work but in his personal life as well. He owned a large ranch on the outskirts of town, a symbol of his wealth and success. His house was impressive, with sweeping views of the countryside, and he was well known as the man who always got things done. No matter what, Charles had a family, a wife named Margaret, who stood by him through everything, and a daughter, Emily. Emily was the apple of his eye when she was younger. He loved watching her grow, taking pride in her intelligence and the strength she had shown from a young age. She was lively, always full of energy, and her laughter could fill the entire house. The relationship between Charles and Emily was strong. He believed she would one day take over the ranch and continue the family legacy. In his eyes, she was his pride and joy, destined to carry on his name and the traditions of their family. But everything changed in an instant. One fateful afternoon, when Emily was just 17, her life was turned upside down. She had gone out with some friends for a horseback ride, something she loved to do. Emily had always been a confident rider, but on that particular day, something went wrong. The horse she was riding spooked and bucked, throwing her off with such force that she hit her head and back on the hard ground. It was a terrible accident. Emily was rushed to the hospital, and Charles, Margaret, and everyone in town were left in shock. The doctors informed the family that Emily had suffered a severe spinal cord injury, and the damage was so extensive that she would never walk again. For Charles, this was a nightmare that he couldn't wake up from. The man who had always been in control now felt completely powerless. His daughter, his strong, independent girl, would never be the same. He was angry. Angry at the world, angry at the accident, and even angry at Emily. He couldn't understand why this had happened to her. The thought of his daughter being confined to a wheelchair, depending on others for everything, crushed him. He couldn't bear to see her like this. Margaret, on the other hand, was devastated but tried to stay strong for Emily. She knew that Emily's spirit was strong, and though she had lost the use of her legs, she still had her mind and her heart. Margaret encouraged Emily every day, reminding her that she could still do so much with her life, even if things were different. But Charles couldn't see it that way. All he saw was a future that had been stolen from his daughter, a future he had planned for her. At first, Charles tried to be supportive, but his support came with conditions. He would visit Emily in the hospital, but the words he spoke weren't comforting. He told her that she would have to learn to accept it and that life wasn't fair. When she struggled with her therapy and needed help, Charles would sigh, frustrated, and tell her she needed to be tougher. "This is life now, Emily. Stop feeling sorry for yourself," he would say, thinking that he was toughening her up, but in reality, his harsh words were only making things worse. As Emily tried to adjust to her new reality, her father's coldness and mockery began to eat away at her. She had always looked up to him, admired him for his strength and success, but now she felt nothing but disappointment and hurt. The man she had once trusted with her dreams was now the one who seemed to be crushing them. Instead of encouraging her to find new ways of achieving her goals, Charles seemed to think she had already reached her limits. He couldn't accept that Emily's life would be different now, and he couldn't accept the fact that his daughter, once so full of life and possibility, might never be the same again. It wasn't just his words that hurt Emily. It was the way he looked at her with pity in his eyes. Every time she struggled with a task like reaching for something high or moving around in her wheelchair, Charles would make comments about how difficult things would be for her from now on. His mockery wasn't loud or cruel, but it was clear in the way he treated her. He would roll his eyes when she asked for help, as if she were a burden. He would suggest that she wouldn't be able to contribute to the family farm anymore, and that maybe it was time to think about her new place in life. These words stung, and every day Emily's hope seemed to shrink a little more. She wanted to prove to her father that she could still live a full life, but each time she tried, Charles would somehow knock her down. Her father's expectations of her had always been high, and now, those expectations seemed to be nothing more than a reminder of all that she had lost. As Emily withdrew more into herself, the rest of the family struggled to deal with the changes. Margaret, although loving, didn't have the words to ease the growing distance between father and daughter. She could see how hurt Emily was, but she also understood Charles's pain. though it was misguided. Charles had always been the strong one, the one who could protect and provide, and now he felt helpless. But his helplessness turned into anger, and that anger was misdirected at Emily. In the midst of this tension, a new figure entered the town, a rancher named Hank Davis. Hank wasn't a stranger to hard work or hardship. He had spent most of his life working on the ranch he had inherited from his father. Unlike Charles, who was wealthy and had always been surrounded by comfort, Hank knew what it was like to struggle, to work from dawn until dusk just to get by. But there was something different about Hank. He wasn't interested in status or showing off. He was humble, kind-hearted, and had a quiet strength about him that made people gravitate toward him. Hank had heard about Emily's accident, and although he didn't know her personally, he had seen her around town before the accident. He could tell right away that she had always been a strong, determined young woman. He couldn't imagine how difficult it must have been for her, losing so much in such a short time. But when he saw her again after the accident, sitting in her wheelchair, he didn't see weakness. He saw someone with a lot of potential, someone who still had a fire inside her. And he made a silent promise to himself that he would not let her slip into despair, not if he could help it. Hank started stopping by the Lawson Ranch from time to time, offering help with odd jobs around the property. It wasn't out of pity, but out of a genuine desire to be kind. He didn't try to push Emily, but instead he gave her space to show him what she was capable of. He didn't look at her as someone broken. He saw a person who had the power to overcome whatever life threw her way. As the days went by, Hank and Emily started to talk more. Hank never treated her with the pity her father did. Instead, he treated her with respect and encouraged her to do what she could at her own pace. Emily began to feel a spark of hope again. Perhaps with time she could find a way to live her life on her own terms just as she had before. And maybe, just maybe, Hank could help her see her own strength in a way her father never could. As the weeks passed, Emily's world became smaller. Her once vibrant life, full of possibilities and laughter, had shrunk down to the four walls of her bedroom. The wheelchair was no longer just a tool to help her move. It had become a reminder of everything she had lost. She found herself staring out of the window for hours, watching the world continue as if nothing had changed. The fields were green, the trees swayed gently in the breeze, and people in town went about their daily routines. But for Emily, the world felt distant, as though she were locked in a place she couldn't escape. Her father, Charles, seemed to get busier with his work. He wasn't cruel in a traditional sense, but his actions spoke volumes. He was distant even when he was at home. He would come to check on her, but his visits were short and mechanical. There was no warmth in his voice, and he avoided eye contact. Every time he did speak, it was always about what she couldn't do anymore, what she needed to learn to accept. "You can't do the ranch work anymore, Emily. You need to start focusing on what's important now. Just learn to adjust to life in a wheelchair," he would say, and then leave the room without a second glance. Emily hated hearing those words. She hated feeling like a burden, like a person who could no longer contribute. She had always been independent. From the time she was a little girl, she had loved helping her father on the ranch. She was proud of the work she did, whether it was feeding the horses, helping to fix fences, or even gathering eggs from the chicken coop. But now everything felt out of reach. Every attempt she made to do something on her own, even something small, was met with her father's sharp, discouraging words. Her mother, Margaret, did her best to comfort her. Margaret was the kind of person who saw the good in every situation, always trying to find the silver lining. But even Margaret couldn't shield Emily from the painful reality that things were different now. Emily could see the worry in her mother's eyes, the way she tiptoed around her husband's mood, and the way she always tried to hide the cracks in their family. Margaret wanted Emily to stay hopeful, to keep fighting, but she was afraid that Emily was losing the will to try. It was during this time of isolation and self-doubt that Hank Davis began to appear in Emily's life more often. Hank wasn't a stranger to hard work or struggle. He had grown up on a farm, and his life had never been easy. But there was something different about him. He didn't pity people, and he certainly didn't look down on anyone. He was a man of few words but immense kindness. He had heard about Emily's accident, but instead of feeling sorry for her, he saw something deeper, something that most people missed. Hank had been a part of the community for many years, though he wasn't the type to seek out attention. He had a quiet confidence about him, and people respected him for his honest work and straightforward ways. Hank had a ranch just a few miles from the Lawson family's land. It wasn't as large or as grand as Charles's, but it was a place that reflected who Hank was, simple, hardworking, and true to the earth beneath his feet. One afternoon, as Emily sat on the porch staring out at the empty fields, she noticed Hank walking toward the house. She had seen him around, of course, but they had never spoken much. He was a bit older than her, and they ran in different circles, but she knew who he was. Hank had a reputation for being kind to everyone, and she had always admired his quiet strength. "Hey there, Emily," Hank greeted her with a smile. Emily looked up, surprised that he had even noticed her sitting outside. She had been so used to people either ignoring her or treating her like a fragile doll that she wasn't sure how to respond. "Oh, hi, Hank," she said, trying to sound cheerful, though her voice betrayed her emotions. "Mind if I join you?" Hank asked, settling himself on the steps next to her without waiting for an invitation. He didn't seem uncomfortable at all, as if it was just another normal conversation between friends. Emily hesitated for a moment before nodding. Sure. They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun dip lower in the sky. Emily was used to the silence by now, but Hank didn't seem bothered by it. It wasn't awkward like it often was with her family. Hank simply seemed at ease. "You know," Hank said after a while, breaking the silence, "I've been watching you work with that chair. You're doing a great job, you know?" Emily raised an eyebrow, unsure of what he meant. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've seen you out here trying to figure things out. You've got a lot of determination. Most folks would have given up by now, but not you." Emily felt a twinge of surprise. She hadn't expected anyone to notice her attempts. It had been hard enough to adjust to her new reality, but even harder to accept that people might see her as weak or broken. The idea that Hank had noticed her struggle and found something admirable in it left her speechless for a moment. "I'm just trying to get by," Emily muttered, feeling the old sting of doubt creeping back. "It's hard, though. Everything's so different now. I don't know if I'll ever be able to do what I used to do again." Hank looked at her, his expression serious but understanding. "Maybe you won't do things the way you used to," he said, "but that doesn't mean you can't do something new. You just have to find another way. It's all about figuring out what works for you." Emily looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his words. Most people had either avoided the subject of her disability or offered advice that felt condescending. But Hank's approach was different. He wasn't telling her what to do. He was simply acknowledging her strength and encouraging her to keep going, even if it was hard. "That's easy for you to say," Emily muttered, her frustration bubbling up. "You don't know what it's like." "You can walk. You can do everything you want," Hank nodded slowly. "You're right. I don't know exactly what it's like to be in your shoes. But I do know what it's like to work hard, and I know what it's like to not give up when things get tough. And from what I've seen, you've got that same spirit." Emily felt a lump form in her throat. No one had spoken to her like that in a long time. It was as if Hank had opened a door inside her that she had long since shut, the door to hope, to the belief that maybe things could be different. Maybe there was still something she could do with her life. For the first time in a long while, Emily smiled. It wasn't a huge, joyful smile, but it was something. It was a flicker of hope, something she hadn't felt in months. Maybe, just maybe, Hank was right. Maybe she wasn't completely lost after all. Over the next few days, Hank continued to visit Emily. He didn't come with grand promises or big gestures. He simply spent time with her, showing her little things she could do to regain some of her independence. He helped her with tasks around the yard, but he always made sure that she was involved, that she was learning how to do things for herself. His encouragement was steady, never forced, and Emily began to feel something shift inside her. She wasn't sure what it was yet, but there was a part of her that wanted to believe Hank's words, that she could still do something with her life. As the days turned into weeks, Emily began to feel the spark of her old self return. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments of doubt, but Hank's presence in her life made a difference. He didn't pity her, and he didn't tell her to accept her new life without a fight. He simply reminded her that there was always a way forward, even when things seemed impossible. And little by little, Emily started to believe it. As weeks turned into months, Emily started to find a new rhythm in her life, one that was far from perfect but felt like progress. Hank Davis had become a steady presence, visiting her almost every day. At first, Emily wasn't sure what to think of Hank's kindness. She had spent so much time feeling isolated, hurt by her father's harsh words and uncertain of her place in the world, that it was hard to accept someone being so genuinely supportive without expecting something in return. But Hank never treated her like a charity case or someone who needed fixing. He simply treated her like a person who had the strength to rebuild her life. No matter how different it might look now, one afternoon, Emily was sitting outside, her wheelchair parked under the shade of an old oak tree. She was trying to do some simple stretches with her legs, a part of her physical therapy routine, but the process was slow and painful. Every time she tried to stretch, her muscles would ache, and she would feel the weight of her injury in a way that she couldn't ignore. Emily had always been someone who loved movement, running through fields, riding horses, climbing fences. Now those simple pleasures felt like distant memories. As she was about to give up and wheel herself back inside, she heard Hank's familiar voice. "Need some help?" he asked, his voice calm and reassuring. Emily turned her head and smiled faintly. "I'm just trying to stretch, but it's hard. My legs feel like they're not even mine anymore." Hank nodded and sat down beside her, not making any grand promises but simply offering his support. "I know it's tough, but I've seen you get stronger. You've been pushing through more than most people could handle. You don't need to be perfect, just keep going little by little." Emily appreciated his words, though she didn't always believe them. The physical pain she felt every day was something no one could see, and the emotional burden of her father's harshness weighed heavily on her. But Hank's quiet encouragement was a balm to her wounded spirit, something she hadn't realized she needed until it was there. One afternoon, Hank showed up with a small package in his hands. "Thought you might like to try something new," he said, offering the package to Emily. "What's this?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. He handed her the package and she carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a set of paints, brushes, and a sketch pad. Emily raised an eyebrow. "I don't know how to paint, Hank." "That's not the point," he said with a smile. "You don't have to be an expert, but sometimes it helps to express yourself in a different way. You've got a lot of emotions in you, and art might be a way to let them out." At first, Emily was hesitant. She had never considered herself an artist, and the idea of sitting still for long periods to paint seemed impossible. But Hank's encouragement wasn't about painting a masterpiece. It was about trying something different, something that could help her process the feelings she had buried deep inside. The next day, Emily sat down with the art supplies, unsure of where to start. She dipped the brush into the blue paint and let it glide over the paper, not thinking about what she was doing but just letting her hand move freely. It felt strange at first, but there was something calming about the motion. She painted for hours, the quiet of the afternoon surrounding her as she lost herself in the process. By the time the sun began to set, she had a full page of abstract swirls and shapes, a mixture of blues, greens, and purples. It wasn't beautiful, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that she had created something, and that gave her a small sense of control in a world that often felt out of her hands. The next time Hank came by, he took one look at her painting and grinned. "I knew you had it in you," he said. "See? It's not about being perfect. It's about expressing what's inside." Emily felt a warmth spread through her chest. Hank wasn't judging her work. He was acknowledging the effort, the emotion, the vulnerability that it took for her to open up in that way. It was a simple thing, but it meant more to her than he could know. Over the next few weeks, Emily found herself painting more and more. Each piece she created was a reflection of how she was feeling, and though the paintings were far from perfect, they allowed her to process her emotions in ways words never could. Through her art, Emily began to see herself in a different light. She wasn't just a girl in a wheelchair, a victim of an accident. She was someone who could still create, still express, still move forward, even if it was just in small, sometimes painful steps. Her world wasn't as small as she had once thought. There were new possibilities, new ways of living, if only she could learn to find them. As time went on, Emily became more comfortable with Hank's visits. Their conversations, once awkward and hesitant, began to flow more easily. Hank would tell her stories about his ranch, about the struggles he faced growing up, about the way his father had taught him to never give up no matter what life threw at him. Emily found herself laughing at his stories, feeling a sense of connection that she hadn't felt in a long time. It was clear to her now that Hank wasn't just a neighbor or a kind soul who wanted to help. He was someone who genuinely believed in her. One afternoon, as Emily was sitting outside with Hank, she felt a small but significant shift within herself. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like a burden. She felt like she had something to offer, something she could still contribute. "You know," she said, glancing up at Hank, "I've been thinking about the ranch. I used to love helping out there. I may not be able to do everything I did before, but maybe there's a way I can still be useful." Hank smiled, his eyes lighting up. "That's the spirit. We all find new ways to do things when life changes. You've got more to offer than you think." His words gave her the courage to think about the future in a way she hadn't allowed herself to before. Maybe she could still help with the ranch, but in different ways. Maybe she could become involved in the community, finding a way to give back and find fulfillment in things that didn't require her to walk. Slowly, she began to see the possibilities open up in front of her. It wasn't going to be easy, and there would be many struggles ahead, but Emily had something she hadn't had in a long time: hope. By the time spring rolled around, Emily's days were filled with purpose. She still painted, still spent time with Hank, and slowly began to take on new tasks around the ranch. She couldn't do everything her father expected, but she was finding her own way of contributing. It was a small victory, but it felt like the beginning of something bigger. Emily realized that although she might never walk again, she didn't have to be defined by her wheelchair. Her spirit, her strength, her ability to create, these were the things that truly defined her. And for the first time since the accident, Emily began to believe that the future might not be as bleak as she had once thought. The road ahead was still uncertain, but with Hank by her side and a growing belief in herself, she felt ready to face whatever came next. As the months passed, Emily's life had begun to change in ways she never thought possible. The days of feeling completely lost, trapped in a world where she didn't know how to move forward, were slowly becoming a distant memory. Thanks to Hank's steady friendship and her own growing determination, Emily was finding new ways to live, ways that made her feel alive again. She had come a long way from the girl who had once been overwhelmed by her disability and her father's harsh criticism. Now she felt stronger, more confident, and more willing to face the challenges ahead. One spring afternoon, Emily sat by the window, watching the sun dip behind the distant hills. The ranch, with its wide fields and endless skies, had always been her place of peace. It was where she felt most at home, and despite the changes that had come with her injury, she still loved it. She missed being able to run across the fields, tending to the animals and working alongside her father. But now she found herself thinking about how to find new ways to contribute, ways that didn't rely on her legs. Hank had continued to encourage her to explore different skills. He taught her how to manage tasks around the ranch in ways that worked for her, tasks that didn't require her to walk or move as quickly as she once could. Whether it was learning to train the horses using different techniques, keeping the ranch's records, or overseeing some of the day-to-day operations, Emily felt a new sense of purpose. It wasn't the life she had imagined for herself, but it was her life, and she was determined to make the most of it. As she grew more comfortable in her new role, something unexpected began to happen. Emily found herself thinking about the future. Not just her future, but her father's future too. It was clear that Charles had never expected his daughter to take over the ranch, especially after her accident. He had always envisioned Emily following in his footsteps, being strong and capable in the traditional sense. But now he seemed to have little hope that she would ever be able to run the ranch the way he had. The tension between them had been building for months. Charles still hadn't fully accepted the change in Emily's life. He hadn't come to terms with the fact that his daughter wasn't going to be the person he had once imagined. His words were still sharp, and while he didn't openly criticize her as much as before, his attitude was filled with unspoken disappointment. He would make comments like, "It's not the same around here," or, "I never thought things would turn out this way." Emily could sense that her father was struggling with his feelings. He loved her, she knew that, but he didn't know how to show it. His love came with expectations that until recently she had been able to meet. But now those expectations were a weight she couldn't lift. One evening after a long day of work, Emily was sitting on the porch when her father came outside. The air was warm, and the sky was painted with the soft colors of the setting sun. Charles sat beside her, but for a long time neither of them spoke. There was a heaviness in the air, an unspoken tension that had been building for so long that Emily wasn't sure how to break it. She knew her father still struggled with her disability, still found it hard to believe that she could do the things she wanted to do, but she was no longer the same girl who had hidden her tears behind a quiet smile. Emily was stronger now, and she wanted to find a way to make her father understand that she was still capable. Maybe not in the ways he had hoped, but in her own way. "Dad?" she finally said, her voice steady but soft. "I've been thinking." Charles turned his gaze toward her, and for a moment he looked almost surprised that she had spoken up. He had never been one for deep conversations, especially when it came to emotions. But Emily knew this was the moment she had to confront the truth. "I know you've been disappointed with how things have turned out," Emily continued. "But I want you to know something. I'm still your daughter. I'm still here and I still care about the ranch. I may not be able to do everything the way you did, but I can help. I can still contribute." Charles was silent for a long time, his face unreadable. Emily could feel the weight of his gaze on her, and for a moment she wondered if she had said too much. But then, something in his expression shifted. It wasn't a huge change, but it was enough to make Emily feel like he was finally starting to understand. He cleared his throat and looked away for a moment as if gathering his thoughts. I don't know what to do anymore," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "I never expected this. I never thought I'd have to deal with this." Emily nodded, her heart aching for the father she had always admired. She knew he wasn't trying to hurt her, but his inability to accept her disability had created a chasm between them that seemed impossible to bridge. "I get it, Dad," she said gently, "but you have to see that I'm not gone. I'm still here, and I'm still part of this ranch. I can help in my own way." Charles took a deep breath, and for the first time in a long while, Emily saw a flicker of something in his eyes. It was vulnerability, a glimpse of the man who was still struggling to reconcile his love for her with the reality of her condition. "I don't know how to let go of the idea that you were supposed to take over everything," he admitted, his voice raw. "It's hard for me to watch you struggle, Emily. I've always wanted you to have a future, a good life, and now I feel like I've failed you somehow." "You haven't failed me," Emily replied firmly. "You've always tried to do what's best for me. But what's best for me now is to have you believe in me, not in the way you thought I should be, but in the person I've become." There was a long silence after that, as Charles seemed to digest her words. Emily didn't expect an immediate answer. This wasn't something that could be fixed overnight, but it was a step forward. She knew that change wouldn't come easily for her father, but at least now he was starting to see her as someone who could still make a difference. Over the next few weeks, things slowly began to shift. Charles still had his moments of doubt, and there were times when his frustration would surface, but he began to give Emily more responsibilities around the ranch. Slowly, he started to understand that she had value, not just as his daughter, but as someone who could help carry the family legacy forward in her own way. One day, as they were working together in the barn, Charles turned to Emily and said, "I don't know if I can ever fully accept that things won't go back to the way they were, but I think I'm starting to see that you're still capable of a lot more than I gave you credit for." Emily smiled, feeling a rush of warmth spread through her. It wasn't everything, but it was a start to healing, to understanding, and to rebuilding the trust and love that had been lost along the way. They weren't done yet, but at least now they were walking down the same path together. The days had become easier, not because everything had been fixed, but because Emily had found a way to embrace the life she now lived. Her relationship with her father, once strained and filled with unsaid words and unacknowledged feelings, was slowly mending. It wasn't perfect and it wasn't easy, but there was a sense of understanding that had begun to grow between them. For the first time in a long while, Emily felt like she was truly seen by her father, not just as his daughter, but as someone with her own strength and purpose. It had been months since that first conversation with him on the porch, and though there were still moments of tension, they had found a new way to work together. Charles had started to include Emily in more aspects of the ranch, allowing her to manage some of the daily tasks that required attention. He'd stopped questioning her abilities, and instead he started to ask for her input on important decisions. She was no longer treated like someone who was fragile or incapable. But the most significant change wasn't just the tasks she was able to do, it was the way she began to feel about herself. Emily had always been a fighter, but the accident had almost taken that from her. The accident had made her feel weak, helpless, and unable to do the things she had once loved. But now, after months of hard work, encouragement, and support from people like Hank, Emily began to rediscover her own strength. The ranch, which had once seemed like a place she could never fully belong again, was slowly becoming a place of healing for her. She no longer saw it as a reminder of everything she had lost. Instead, she saw it as a symbol of everything she had gained. The bond she had with Hank had grown stronger, not just because he had been there for her when she needed him, but because he had shown her a side of herself she had forgotten existed. His belief in her had sparked something that Emily hadn't realized she had: the belief in herself. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Emily sat outside, watching the colors change in the sky. She felt peaceful, more at home with herself than she had in a long time. The work on the ranch had become second nature, and though it was still hard, it no longer felt impossible. She had learned to adapt, to be creative with her abilities, and to accept the new rhythm of life. Her father walked up to her, as he had done many times before, but this time, there was something different about his expression. He sat down beside her and took a deep breath before speaking. "You know, I've been thinking," Charles began, his voice quieter than usual. "I've been so focused on what you couldn't do that I didn't see what you could do. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for not believing in you sooner." Emily turned to him, surprised by his words. For the longest time, she had wished for a moment like this. A moment when her father would finally see her for who she had become. She had always known he loved her, but his expectations and his disappointment had clouded his ability to truly understand her strength. Now it seemed like that was changing. "It's okay, Dad," Emily said, her voice soft but steady. "I know you didn't mean to hurt me. You just wanted the best for me." Charles nodded, his gaze turning to the horizon. "I think I've been holding on to the past for too long. I wanted you to be everything I imagined you would be. But the truth is, you've become something even better. You've become someone I'm proud of in a way I never expected." Emily smiled, a sense of warmth filling her heart. "I'm still the same person, Dad. I'm still your daughter. I had to figure out how to be that person in a new way." The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable this time. Instead, it was filled with understanding. The kind of understanding that comes when two people finally see each other for who they truly are. Emily could tell that her father had finally let go of the image he had once held of her, the image of the girl who could run across the fields without a care in the world, and had started to see her for the woman she had become. It wasn't just about the ranch anymore. It was about the respect they had for each other as individuals. Over the next few weeks, their relationship continued to improve. Charles became more involved in Emily's life in a way that felt more balanced. He no longer expected her to be who she was before the accident. Instead, he started to appreciate her for who she was now, someone who had faced tremendous challenges with courage and resilience. Emily, in turn, began to let go of her own expectations of her father. She understood now that he was struggling, just as she had been. They were both learning to adapt to this new chapter of their lives, and for the first time in a long time, they were doing it together. The changes in their relationship were subtle, but they were real. Emily no longer felt like she had to prove herself to her father. She knew that he understood her now, even if it had taken time. But it wasn't just her father who had changed. Emily herself had transformed in ways she hadn't anticipated. She had started to see the world through different eyes that didn't focus on what was lost but on what could still be gained. She wasn't defined by her wheelchair or her disability. She was defined by her strength, her creativity, and her ability to keep going, even when it seemed impossible. Hank continued to be a source of support and inspiration for Emily. Though their relationship had started out as a friendship built on mutual respect, it had gradually deepened. Emily had come to see Hank as more than just a neighbor, or someone who had helped her get through tough times. He had become someone she could count on, someone who believed in her even when she didn't believe in herself. One afternoon, Hank stopped by the ranch to check on Emily, as he often did. He found her sitting on the porch, her sketchpad in her lap. She had been painting again, this time working on a piece that she planned to enter in the county fair. It wasn't just about the competition. It was about proving to herself that she could still do the things she loved. Hank sat beside her, watching her work in silence. "You've come a long way, Emily," he said after a while. Emily looked up, a small smile playing on her lips. I couldn't have done it without you. Hank shook his head. You did all the hard work. I just pointed the way. Emily looked out at the sprawling fields before her, feeling a sense of peace that she hadn't felt in a long time. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over everything. The ranch, the place that had once seemed like a reminder of everything she had lost, was now a symbol of everything she had gained. It was a place where she had learned to find strength in herself, to adapt to new circumstances, and to embrace the challenges ahead. Looking at Hank, she felt a sense of gratitude for everything he had done for her. But more than that, she felt grateful for herself. She had come so far, and though there were still challenges ahead, she knew she could face them. And when the fair finally arrived, Emily entered her painting, not because she expected to win, but because she knew that it was a reflection of her journey, one that was far from over but had already taught her so much about resilience, strength, and the power of believing in yourself. As the day came to an end, with the sun setting on another beautiful evening, Emily felt a sense of peace wash over her. She wasn't the same person she had been before the accident, and maybe that was a good thing. She had learned to embrace her new life, to find beauty in the things she once thought were lost, and to build a future she could be proud of. And as she sat there, surrounded by the people who believed in her, she knew that whatever came next, she was ready for it.